When El Salvador was an oligarchy, when people had to work in the fields, obviously their skin would be darker because like that was their livelihood, that was what they did day in and day out. And when you had fairer skin, you were obviously upper class or European, you know, from a Spanish background. And I think that that sort of old like system of power permeated into how we perceive beauty and how we perceive class and how we perceive a certain type of privilege in Salvadorian culture. So that is to say, the fairer that your skin is, the more, I guess, the more likely it is that you're either one, rich, or two, European, which means that you are rich and you are privileged. Whereas in the other end of the spectrum, you would be one, indigenous, or one, like a farmhand, meaning you're, you know, of a very, very like low class. Most of the Salvadorian population, like around 90%, is like mestizos, which means that they descended from a European and indigenous mix. So although, you know, there was a caste system that tried to like delineate, you know, how white you were, you know, through your lines, like how close you were to your European lineage, it was really hard to police that. And so like a lot of people just base, you know, class and I guess like wealth on how like light their skin is. There's a huge gender bias. Like if you're a woman and if you're fair, that's exponentially more beautiful than if you're a man, if you're fair. Like when like my aunts would talk to me and they would start talking about marriage or boyfriend, like they would always say, oh, you're so lucky, you're so fair, you know, because like you could find anyone. If you possess like African like features, and you say you're Salvadorian, people won't believe you because it's the general notion on El Salvador is that it didn't have access to the slave trade. So if you're African or you're like Afro-Salvadorian, then that's highly unlikely. You know, people don't even believe you. So not even being accepted into a culture that is your own, just because of like the history that comes with it, you know, I think it's something that has to be looked at, you know, because anti-blackness still exists, you know, not just within like our own community, but of the communities that came in and integrated into our own.
I mean, I can talk about my Palestinian community and the Arab community that I grew up in. I think, I mean, I grew up with my mom, like, you know, warning me not to go out in the sun because I would get too dark. Back home, the way that people typically get married, a lot of the times they would say we need a pretty woman, a pretty girl, and the way they would describe her is that she would have to have colored eyes and she would have light skin and she would have to have light hair. What pretty girl meant, Bennett Hedwa, meant that she was basically white, and as the lighter she got, the more beautiful she became. Colorism is more, I think in my society that I grew up in, is more oppressive to women than it was to men. My mother is darker. She's darker than me. She has like curly hair, a little bit more coarse. And my father was considered like a model. That's what they used to call him because he had colored eyes, he had white skin, and he had like thin, like long, luscious hair. When he told his family about it, it was the end of the world. Like, oh, you're this beautiful man, how are you gonna marry this like dark-skinned woman? My mother struggled with that a lot, and then, so yeah, so I think from my experience, it's more having that darker skin. She had to compensate for that. And with her family, it's like, oh, well, my grandmother always tells her like, oh, well, we didn't take you for your beauty, but you had brains.
I think there's like a predominant like beauty ideal that's very Eurocentric, that's very like light skin, fair and lovely. Fair and Lovely is a skin cream. It's a moisturizer slash sunscreen slash like, I think there's bleach in it or something, but it brightens your skin. It gets ingrained in a lot of people that like you don't want to be dark. Like your mother says like, oh, stay out of the sun and things like that. Like I think a lot of people had that influence growing up. Gender is a big thing. I have a younger brother and like I don't think he got the same comments as me. My younger cousin, she moved here like 2 years ago, so she's like 10 years old, and she was playing like an iPhone app on my phone, and like she was like it's like a doll maker, and the doll, like, she chose the lightest skin tone and like blonde hair. I was like, why don't you pick that one or like that color? And then she's like, that's ugly. And like that hurt. Like that was so hard to hear. Perceptions of beauty are like formed at such a young age. They carry on for such a long time. I had to sit her down and like have a conversation like, no, you're pretty. Like, you don't have to be lighter skinned to be pretty. Moving forward, it's important to talk to like young women, especially like in formative years, like girls that are learning like, oh, what should I hold important about myself? It shouldn't be your skin color.
My mom recently went back to South Sudan for the first time, and she was telling me that like all the women there are like really like light and like almost red because they use like the creams. So she was telling me like she went to this party, and like the people who are darker, they're like, oh, here, you hold the food, or you do this, like you go to the back because you're not as beautiful. Whereas the people who are lighter, it's just like, oh yeah, you can come out and like dance because you're like valued more. Within like the African American community or within the Black community, what I've experienced is more like wanting like the red bone, or which is like a lighter skinned Black girl, or like wanting someone who's like brown skin, whereas like dark skin is like not really valued. So definitely valuing like lighter skin, browner, better, whereas like the darker is just like seen as like dirty or like just bad or dark. With the hair thing, definitely a lot of people like wanting like straight hair, like getting like sew-ins. Now I feel like the natural movement with like women with like afros is going around, but like when I used to wear my hair like, well, I still wear my hair natural, but like back then when it wasn't a fad or cool, it was like, oh, she's just nappy-headed. And we also have like yearly like or annually like conferences like of the South Sudanese diaspora, and some women talked about like having natural hair, and like the older like African women, they were just kind of like, you won't like get hired like that, like wearing an afro, like what are you trying to do, not have a job? Like you need to, like a lot of them wear like wigs and stuff. It's just like, no, like you have to like present yourself in a certain way when you're in public, so the wigs would be like straight hair, kind of conventional American wigs.
A lot of guys with darker skinned folk would say, okay, you know, I want to light skin this, you know, good hair, no weave in her hair, you know, this and that, light eyes. I mean, it's really what we're fed through the TV. A lot of organizations, businesses, there used to be a test called the brown paper bag test. It happened amongst Black fraternities, sororities, happened, you know, in businesses, it happened just in society, to where if you weren't lighter than this brown paper bag, you weren't accepted. So imagine a community, and they legitimately hold up a brown paper bag to you and say, lighter, yes, darker, no. If you matched, still no. A few months ago, actually, I lived in New Orleans, and some friends of mine and I, we were just down, you know, downtown, hanging out. One of my friends, we're all darker complexion guys. We're brown and dark. And one of my friends, he sees a girl that he went to high school with. She's lighter complexion, brown and light skin. And he stops and they, you know, they start talking. And then, you know, she asks about some of us. So a couple of us go over, you know, we're just having a conversation. Her friend turned around and said, came back a couple of steps and said, girl, them boys is dark skinned, they are not light skinned. You need to come on. And she stopped mid-sentence, turned around, and kind of headed out. It was definitely concrete proof to me that, like, this thing is real, and it kind of affects all of us, no matter who you are.
Within Indian society, light skin is considered more attractive, it is considered an indicator for many like positive factors. I think people consider someone who is light skinned to be more successful, to be from a better background, to be more wealthy, to be just have had a better upbringing, and you know, to be more intelligent or more well educated. And I think that's something that's very prevalent within India, but I think it applies to like Indian Americans in the US as well. And more broadly, I think light skin as a whole among all races is something that has become kind of synonymous with being better, with being superior. I think growing up, I was always told that dark skin was a bad thing. It was always pointed out to me that I was like the darkest person in my family, and I don't know, like relatives would always joke to my parents about like, oh, like you guys aren't that dark. How'd you turn out so dark? And so it was something that was always viewed as negative. There was always a lot of pressure to kind of overcome being dark, whether it was like actually physically changing skin color, like through things like fairness creams or makeup. So there was definitely just always this pressure to overcome being dark, because it was just seen as something that was negative and something that was undesirable. I mean, when I was little, I think I was just completely like brainwashed that light was good and dark was bad. Some people are light, some people are dark. The light ones are better, and I'm dark.
I know, like, when I watch Bollywood movies, all the actresses look white, and, like, they don't look brown, because you can tell by their features, but they look white because that's what is supposed to be the standard of beauty. It's always about women, because no one cares about men and if they're dark or light. The way that I'm always talked about as, in white circles, as the Indian friend, in brown circles, the darker girl is always referred to as the dark girl. Dark skin is only viewed in relation to light skin, so there's no way to separate them. There's no light skin without dark skin and vice versa. So I don't view them as separate entities, because you can only have one with the contrast of the other. And because light is closest to white, it is therefore better, and dark is closer to black, so therefore it's worse. I remember someone making a comment, like some relative in India, about like being dark isn't good or whatever. And I remember as like a middle schooler, I didn't like tanning. I didn't like getting darker. Growing up as a little kid, I thought I'd be white eventually, because like that's everything that, you know, in movies and in all my classmates, everyone was white in like suburbia. Within the South Asian community, definitely needs reflection, because it is yet another sexist tool to separate women and pit them against each other.